Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing A Drop of Light by All Traps on Earth.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
This album, there's a lot to say about it. Honestly, I'm not even gonna try and start now. Just enjoy some of my favorite bits from this album and then we'll continue. So let's play the analogy game, why don't we? So let's meet up our first player, and that's Frank. Frank is what I expected this album to be, very dark, very ominous, and probably liking death metal. But apparently this album didn't turn to be that, it turned out to be something more like this. A banana! Truly delicious piece of music. So anyway, getting back to topic, looking at this album's cover, I was expecting to find something along the lines of extreme metal, even maybe death metal in all honesty, but instead what I got was 1 hour and 3 minutes of luscious symphonic prog. So All Traps on Earth formed back in 2013, led of course by the bassist of the well-known band Angligard, Johan Brand, and he was joined by two other Angligard members being Thomas Johnson on the keyboards and Henrik Hammerstrom on the drums and percussions. Now the only other member in this band's lineup that wasn't originally from the Angligard group is actually Johan's own daughter called Miranda Brand. Now she does only the vocals on here and she doesn't play any instruments on here, yet she does have a very pivotal role in the entirety of this album, but I'm gonna touch this subject later on in the video. Now going back to why I was so surprised to see what this album actually turned out to be in the end is because unlike Angligard and especially their album Hybris, I really didn't encounter this one in my research that many times. You see, whenever I research a lot of albums for this series, I always come across the name Angligard and Hybris and Angligard and Hybris and whatever comes from it. But when it comes to this album, which is basically almost as ambitious and good, one might say, as Hybris, I really never saw its name being thrown around. But anyhow, this is A Drop of Light by All Traps on Earth. This is yet another Swedish prog album that just goes to show how Sweden is basically the leading nation in the re-emerging presence of prog nowadays. And this one is made of 5 individual songs, all of them being these big epics with double digits of runtime, all except for the 4th track called First Step. This one is actually only 2 minutes in length and it acts as a sort of, you know, a relaxation phase if you might, and it just builds up towards the last track on the album. Now, this album has a lot in common with Hybris as well as a lot of dissimilarities. So when it comes to the stuff that are actually similar, firstly and foremost, they are both basically mainly reliant on long stretches of music that takes a lot of inspiration from the great music recorded back in the 70s by the greats of prog. But if there's one thing that also makes these two very much similar is the fact that the keyboards both lead these albums quite well and quite meaningfully. cleanly, especially of course the overarching mellotron. But when it comes to the dissimilarities between two albums, I have two that really pop into mind. The first one is, as I said, this album today is quite a bit darker than Hybris, yet Hybris itself isn't that of a bright album to begin with, so it's really not that big of a deal. But the second thing that really puts the difference into the two of them has to be the thing that gives this album a drop of light, this King Crimson edge to it, and that's of course the inclusion of 4 brass and wind instrument players. And these guys, they really add a lot to this album, and you get a lot of variations from saxophone to flute to a trumpet and even recorders. We also have an extra 5th player to be found on here, not as a part of the band, which plays the guitar, and they all, including the wind instruments, are very much acting as some sort of flourishes in this entire album, never quite leading the music but giving it much more weight. Now, as I listened to this music and I was basically very much amazed by what it had to offer, I really tried hard to this time kind of restrain myself from loving it too much. Now, of course, it sounds odd when I say it like that, but what I basically mean is that when I listened to Anglegarde, I was so hyped for their music, I was so ready for it, I was blown away by what it had to offer, but in all actuality, the music wasn't probably as good as I thought it was at the moment. There isn't anything easier than looking at an album like this, listening to it and slapping a good old 10 out of 10 on it, but the thing is, it might not actually be the right case for it. Yes, this one has got everything that I like. It is fast and shifting, there's a lot of moods, there's a lot of, I don't know, motifs. It is jazz inspired, it is hard prog, which is written and executed in a very meticulous and very well done fashion. But when I think about it, maybe at the moment of listening to this, especially for the first time, I was exhilarated by what it had to offer, but leaving this album afterwards, I kind of just didn't really feel like it stuck with me that much. I felt no rush in going back to listening to this album, not even any particular song. My personal favorite from this album was Magmatic Warning, and even this one, being a great song as it is, kinda didn't really make me want to go back and listen to it again after I finished. And you know, here's the icebreaker for you all. I know that I did a review about Anglegarde just 11 days ago, and I had some time to think about it, and I thought about it then, but I thought about it more in the time span up until now, and that's the fact that I'm not quite sure if Hybris is actually a perfect album as I gave its rating. You see, while listening at the moment to the music was just fantastic and exhilarating, I am not entirely sure that I really stuck with this music. It kind of just was, and I kind of just forgot about it, and there's nothing really in particular that I really come back to that album as well. I do still believe that it has fantastically written music on it, and I'd love to hear it any time if you played it on for me, but in all honesty, I'm not really the one to go back and listen into it again. Maybe not anytime soon, especially not with the rough schedule I have to deal with. So it's really hard for me to say this, but I think I was a bit preposterous with the rating I gave to Hybris, and for now, if I had to rate it again, I would lower a 10 to a 9, in mind that maybe one day I'll bring it back up to a 10. So from what I've just said, you might infer that The Drop of Light isn't, in my own personal opinion basically, a perfect album, and you'd be correct, but how imperfect is it? Well, aside from what I just said about the memorability and actual, replayability of this music, I have one other grudge with this music, and it comes in the form of the last track to be found on it. So this last track is actually the only one whose title is originally in Swedish, but I of course went ahead and translated it to its English name, being Forgotten Farms. And this one does this really odd thing, as well as we've seen from Högtid by Agusa, which it basically takes the last track of an entirely instrumental album and suddenly adds vocals in it. Now, while Agusa were able to be kind of scarce with it and puts just a tiny bit of vocals, and most of them weren't even real singing, this one, well, it really kind of relies on the vocals, and this song wouldn't work the same way if it didn't have these lyrics and vocals in it. But wait, you might be asking yourself, especially if you don't know this album, you say that Miranda Brand is on here and she's doing the vocals, so that means she's only on the last track and you didn't even like that? Well, no, I'm sorry for your confusion, that's not the case. Miranda is actually present on this entire album with her sort of semi-operatic vocals, which aren't singing. She never says any lyrics, she just has this amazing, quite angelical voice that she uses throughout this album, mostly actually like an instrument. So think in mind of an album like Camel's The Snow Goose, the way that vocals are used over there while still rendering the album overall as being an instrumental album. Well, the case with this last track, you see, is that the vocals and the singing aren't done by Miranda. They're actually done by her father, being Johan Brand. And his voice, as much as I would like to like it, I really don't. I just don't connect to it. It's not special anyway, it doesn't really sound that good, and honestly I think that it was pretty unnecessary. But I won't go dismissing the fact that maybe if Miranda would have sung the last track on this album, I would have preferred it much better and looked at it more brightly. But yeah, overall, that's what I have to say about this album. It has some really quality music and I highly advise anyone to go ahead and give it a listen because it does serve its purpose of being a very terrific album coming in a time that not a lot of great music, especially in the prog scene, came out in. But as it is, this album really didn't stick with me all that much. I gave it like 1.5 listens by now. I came back to the songs which I preferred, of course not being the last track, and you know, it's good. It's really good. Some people might think it's perfect. I'm personally not the person to say that. So yeah, the rating will show it. So as I already noted, this album is definitely quite misleading, and I'm not the first or last person to say this. I've seen many people thinking that this album would sound in some way because of this cover, but it happened to sound completely different. And while this cover is generally very dark, very unsettling and very macabre, it's actually also pretty much simply just a beautiful cover. And the concept for this cover's imagery could have been done and executed in a very different fashion. It could have relied on being very green and focusing on the growth and blooming, but it decided to be very much, you know, fossilization and staleness and darkness. In this cover's case, a decision was made to make everything dark and include just one drop of light. And I really like that idea. I like that idea of there being always just this one sliver of hope in every situation, which from it we can flourish and grow. Even if the world seems dark and foreboding, there is always a drop of light in it. And I really like the way that this concept is executed with this cover art. And of course all the yada yada yada, yeah, the art, it looks amazing, the colors, the symmetry, the whatever. Let's move on. So as painful as it might seem to some of you watching this video right now, I think that the right score for an album like this, despite it being overall very good, it isn't perfect, and you know, it's not that memorable, at least in my opinion right now, so it will be receiving a rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to a very unique band which I've been wanting to listen to for a while now. Of course, this will be the album Ocean by the band Eloy. Of course, I want to thank my supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan and Rest of Kings and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.